Doc Jamieson has fought harder than anyone to clean up the greyhound racing industry to the point where it's become his life's work. Having grown his career out of the industry after becoming a nationwide success as the leading animal chiropractic specialist in the country, with a chain of clinics and even kenneling and transport services, all Doc ever wanted to do was take care of the animals and clean up the industry he'd been so passionately supporting for his whole life, and put a stop to things like mass greyhound killings, live animal baiting, and expose the stewards, officials and other members of the racing board who were knowingly complicit in allowing these atrocities to go on unchecked, because they themselves had a vested interest, concealing their own illegal ownership of greyhounds and rigging races for their own personal gain. The only people who knew that this was going on and how widespread it actually was throughout the industry was the perpetrators themselves and those whom they had under their thumbs, who couldn't speak up about it for fear of losing their jobs or their racing licenses, their good standing, or worse, having their animals killed, their property vandalised, their businesses and livelihoods destroyed, or even the threat of physical violence. All things Doc Jamieson has had to face and survive while standing up for animal and public welfare, all in the name of truth and integrity. Now, it's no secret how high-level corruption works, and for more than 20 years, the GRA, that's the Greyhound Racing Authority, now known as Racing Queensland, has been trying to silence Doc from exposing theirs. This first came to light in 2006 when, during a surprise property inspection by the GRA, Doc received a tip-off from GRA Chief Steward Danny Ryan that Kerry Watson of the GRA board had been using her contacts in the Chiropractors Board of Queensland to cause trouble for Doc, and also that she was intending to bring Doc down with a false GRA inquiry, which took place in 2007. And that's when it all began to make sense to Doc why he'd been having so much trouble with ongoing false accusations and surprise inspections. Now, we've already gone into great detail breaking down the false inquiry on Doc in the previous 3 videos. Pandora's Box is now wide open, and False Inquiry Breakdown Parts 1 and 2. But this fight between Doc and the GRA board began much earlier than this. So how did it all begin? Doc had been working in the greyhound racing industry since 1994, adjusting up greyhounds for years, with many greyhound owners and trainers attributing their success to Doc's skills. But not only did Doc's superior services mean that the race rigging enterprise couldn't operate smoothly, his unwillingness to stand for the corruption of the industry was a major threat to its lucrative enterprise of race fixing, and as far as the GRA was concerned, Doc had to be silenced. So they began plotting to bring him down. The GRA's first move was to bring Doc to bear under the Greyhound Racing Code and the rules of racing by forcing him to become a licensee, which he never wanted to do, and in 1998, Doc's access to racetracks was to be restricted unless he agreed to become licensed. Doc never wanted to hold a license, but with a substantial portion of his business under threat, he didn't have much choice, so he reluctantly agreed. In the following year of 1999, Doc made his first major move by arranging a meeting with the GRA, namely the GRA CEO, Peter Cork, and the chairman of the stewards, Danny Ryan. Doc put his foot down and demanded that something be done to stop the live baiting, the greyhounds being shot, and the stewards, officials and board members illegally owning greyhounds under false names and rigging races. Doc gave them a chance to clean up the industry in-house, or else he'd go public with all the evidence he'd accumulated over the course of his career.
In that meeting with Danny Ryan in 99, I went there because about the race fixing and animals being blooded, greyhounds being shot, and all the stewards owning greyhounds in false names, rigging races. And Peter Cork, he was the Labor MP, he was there, and Danny went in the room, come back out, talked to me for 15 minutes, went back in talking to him, and then Danny come out to me and says, "Doc, what do you want out of it?" I said, "I don't want any of your dirty money, mate. I want the game cleaned up, and I'm going to make sure it is going to be cleaned up."
But the board was connected. As we've already shown you in previous videos, the Board of Racing Queensland has connections everywhere. Law enforcement, regulation, banking and finance, industry boards, government departments. Systemic corruption runs all the way up the flagpole to the highest levels of government. So events taking place that may seem disconnected are often just one entity and one industry scratching the back of another. In this fashion, it was the GRA's next big move to leverage their connections in the Chiropractors Board of Queensland to begin harassing Doc and threatening his animal chiropractic business. In 2003, Doc received correspondence from Debbie Ramsey, who was the Assistant Registrar of the Chiropractors Board of Queensland at the time, taking issue with the use of the title Chiropractor in an article featuring Doc that was posted more than 5 years prior in 1997, the one and only time where the use of the word chiropractor wasn't preceded by the word animal. Talk about grasping at straws, but this was all they had to insinuate that Doc could be holding himself out to be anything but an animal chiropractor, from an article that was very clearly in reference to animals. The letter affirmed that the board was satisfied that Doc was only treating animals, but warned him that he must qualify his use of the title chiropractor in clear reference to animals, which he always did. Not yet suspecting any foul play, Doc brought this to the attention of a friend of his, Dr. Mark Pickford, human chiropractor and member of the board of the Chiropractors Board of Queensland. Mark told Doc not to give it a second thought and that he'd take care of the whole thing, and Doc wrote back to the registrar advising of the same. Then, just to be safe, a few months later, Doc re-registered his business name to very clearly state that he was a canine chiropractor. But the machinations behind the scenes continued with a false complaint that Doc was holding himself out to be a human chiropractor, and with the Chiropractors Board claiming that Doc had breached the 2001 Chiropractors Registration Act and saying that he wasn't even allowed to use the terms chiropractor or chiropractic in his advertising without being a registrant on the board. The problem with this is that the Act has no jurisdiction over chiropractic for animals, only humans. So Doc replied back to the board as he always did whenever they contacted him, citing the Act with logic and common sense to show that he wasn't in breach and that he had every legal right to use the term chiropractor, having used it for years before the Chiropractors Registration Act was ever even established in 2001. He made it abundantly clear that he'd never claimed to practice chiropractic on humans and had only ever claimed to practice as a chiropractor for animals. He provided the board with a package of information showcasing his career history and skills, news articles, letters of recommendation from canine clubs and clients, a wealth of positive publicity, all showing without any shadow of a doubt that he was no quack and that his skills in treating animals were of the highest caliber in the country. And as you can see here, an absolutely incredible amount of support for Doc. Years upon years of positive testimony. But of course, common sense wasn't enough to stop the board from pursuing litigation against Doc, because they didn't actually have any kind of legitimate gripe with Doc. How could they with someone who wasn't doing anything wrong? It was all for the sake of intimidation and harassment on behalf of the GRA. Thus, the board began to seek legal advice from McCullough Robertson lawyers. From the start of November 2005, Doc repeatedly tried to make contact with the board to find out the status of his case, and wasn't able to speak to anyone until March of 2006, when he was finally informed that the board was still undecided as to how to handle things, that they would meet during the first week of April about it, and that he would receive word by the end of that month. Time dragged on and the board would not return Doc's calls. Then, out of feeling threatened by the Chiropractors Board after also having just been tipped off that the GRA board member Kerry Watson had instigated the whole thing, and against the advice of the Office of Fair Trading, Doc closed down his clinics, changing his business name to exclude any reference to chiropractic in an effort to show his compliance, and continued to push for common sense by submitting his information to the board to show that he wasn't causing any harm to the chiropractic profession. But not being able to safely advertise anymore, business began to dwindle and financial pressure began to mount on Doc. As we already revealed in previous videos, with Doc being unofficially banned from having legal representation, Doc had no end of trouble trying to find a lawyer who would take on his case. Even though it didn't come to light until 2016 that retired Chief Justice Wayne Martin had been threatening disbarment to anyone taking on Doc's case, there's really no telling how far back this was actually going on. But the fact that no one would handle Doc's case, even for the GRA's false inquiry against him that was going on at the same time as the drama with the Chiropractors Board, very strongly suggests that this was the case. Then, in early May, one of Doc's clients, Karen King of KL King and Associates Family Lawyers, offered to help Doc with his case, and this is where Doc's drama with legal representation began. By mid-May, Doc had finally managed to get on to Debbie Ramsey again, only to find out that the board were still undecided on how to handle the matter and that they were waiting on legal advice, which Debbie told Doc was very unusual and that he should be seeking his own legal representation. Debbie also informed Doc of the source of the original complaint from 2003, a Thompson Chiropractic, supposedly located in the Gold Coast. But when Doc paid a visit to the listed address for the business, There was no business there, and aside from the ABN listing, we've yet to find any legitimate existence of any such business, so we highly suspect that the source of the original complaint was nothing more than a fabricated straw man. Later in May, after sitting on the case for some time, Karen advised Doc that he should make contact with her colleague, Jeff Provost, who would be handling his case. Then, on the 31st of May, Doc had an unwelcome guest show up on his property from the OHPRB, that's the Office of Health Practitioner Registration Boards, which is now known as APRA, the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. Brendan Treston, the investigator for the OHPRB, showed up at Doc's residence and trespassed onto his property, taking photographs of Doc's property and his van, which was off the road, unregistered and well outside of public view. Despite Doc ordering him to leave the premises, Brendan refused to leave until Doc picked up the phone to call the police. Afterwards, Doc called his new lawyer, Jeff Provost, about the matter, and much to his surprise, Jeff advised him not to be too hasty in upsetting the board and that they were much too big of an opponent. Doc went to meet with Jeff at his home to discuss the matter, but during the meet, Jeff seemed more interested in talking to Doc's partner at the time, Rachel, about the great gym session he just had and showing her around his home than talking to Doc about the matter of the board having trespassed on his property. During the visit, Jeff called the board and spoke to Brendan. It seemed that Jeff didn't really have much to say while Brendan was the one doing all the talking, and afterwards Jeff continued attempting to placate Doc, advising him not to push the matter of the trespass. Seeing that Jeff clearly didn't have his back, Doc took the case off him and went back to Karen. Karen then sat on the case for another few weeks before eventually reassigning the case to a newly employed solicitor, Janetta Nedvanska, but the case continued to stagnate for weeks while the board moved to prosecute if Doc would not comply with their terms. Eventually, after Doc's repeated follow-up calls, Janetta finally advised that they were going to brief the council to the cost of $2,000. To fund this, Doc sold off his trailer and arranged with the buyer to have funds directly deposited into the law firm's bank account. Janetta advised Doc to get his buyer to contact their office to arrange the deposit, but when the buyer called, he was made to feel like a criminal and questioned as to the source of the funds, having been specifically asked if it was drug money. This obviously didn't go down well with the buyer, and to appease the buyer, Doc settled the sale at $2,000 less than the originally agreed price of $10,000, and then shortly after was advised by Janetta that his interests would be best served by a criminal lawyer. Meanwhile, the gears behind the scenes of the OHPRB and the Chiropractors Board of Queensland continued to turn as the move to prosecute Doc continued. Later in 2007, Karen's secretary, Tara Conway, who resigned after her experience being the proxy between Doc and Karen, provided her support to Doc in the form of a statement detailing the laxity and apathy of the handling of Doc's case by Karen King's firm. So by 2006, the pressure on Doc was mounting with his business all but halted from not being able to advertise, ongoing legal fees for a law firm that didn't have his back, being excluded from the details of any exchanges between the solicitors and the Chiropractors Board, not being able to communicate with the board, and also having been trespassed by Brendan Treston, the OHPRB investigator. So Doc came up with a plan to protect himself. Doc prepared a powerful affidavit to put in place strong penalties for not only having his property trespassed, but also for the unauthorised use of his name. Doc filed this affidavit to both the Maroochydore and Beenleigh courts and served it on every member of the Chiropractors Board of Queensland. In the upcoming videos, we will show just how powerful this document was in the disbanding of the Chiropractors Board of Queensland and their reformation into the Chiropractors Board of Australia, as they attempted to escape the threat of having the tables of prosecution turned back on them. On the 25th of October, Karen King was served with a court summons for Doc, but by that time, Doc had already passed the case on to another solicitor, Elsa Markula of Woodgate and Hughes. Court scheduling was adjourned to give Woodgate and Hughes time to get up to speed on the case. In the meantime, the board forged ahead to proceed with prosecution, and the next court hearing was set for the 5th of January 2007. Elsa Markula's handling of the case was slightly less apathetic, but also entirely unsatisfactory. The board's terms were provided to Doc's new solicitor, stating that Doc must appear in court on the 5th of January and enter a plea of guilty, as well as cover the board's court fees in exchange for no record of conviction. Elsa drafted an acceptance of these terms and provided it to Doc for his approval, but of course, having done nothing wrong, Doc was not going to plead guilty, and he instructed Elsa to convey as much to the board. The board, however, wasn't going to budge on their terms, and Elsa advised Doc that he should accept them. So, for the third time in a row, Doc again fired his solicitor for not having his back and began to prepare his own defense. At this point, having had his business basically destroyed from not being able to properly advertise and having gone through 3 different solicitors, all of whom suspiciously and almost magically appeared always just at the right time to save the day after Doc had endless trouble trying to acquire legal representation, Doc was starting to go broke. So by this point, Doc was pretty well done with lawyers. On the 2nd of February, Doc appeared in court and represented himself. A final court date of April 17th was locked in, and the stage was set for the final battle. Mainstream media got wind of the case, with related coverage going to print in newspapers and also to air on TV.
Hello, I'm Tracy Grimshaw. Welcome to A Current Affair. Also tonight, Australia's Dr. Dolittle and the authorities who are trying to put him out of business. Well, he's been described as Australia's very own Dr. Dolittle, performing miracle cures on animals that vets said should be put down. But his work has put him offside with human chiropractors who are now taking him to court. Magella Weemers has his story.
This is Doc Jamieson, known to his patients and their owners as Doc.
Good. Okay. I'm a unique animal healer. Because he's sore through the spine, he's got nerves. So what I'm going to do is release his head, and I'll release down his spine, then I'm going to release the nerves, and then he'll let me pull his back leg back.
For 25 years, he's been treating dogs, cats and horses who've been in pain. Conventional animal healers, those with proper medical qualifications, in some cases recommended those same animals be put down. But Doc, with no formal training, has managed to heal them. And that has won him glowing reports, his fans even organising a rally to show their support.
The vet said that he probably wouldn't be able to walk again when we first found him. And after one treatment, he was almost right.
She couldn't walk, and the vet said, just put her down. And within 3 weeks of treatment with Doc, she's running around like she always did. Oh, she saved her life, yes.
The list of satisfied customers keeps growing. Handsome the show horse and his owner, Lee Edwards, are also converts to Doc's rather unconventional methods.
He actually lets me know, like he told me, oh, I'm really sore, so I needed to call Doc to get him to come out.
He tells you?
Yeah, he does.
How does that
He's
work?
actually, if you're watching him, he's actually telling Doc where he's sore as well. If you look at his face, he pulls faces and he's sort of saying, no, that's not comfortable there. Excuse me, oh yeah, and I'm sore there. See how he's telling Doc?
But now it's Doc that's in a world of pain, and his unique healing hands may be no more, thanks to the Chiropractors Board of Queensland. It all began 4 years ago when they sent him a letter saying he had to make it clear he didn't treat two-legged patients. Now Doc is adamant he never said he did.
I don't do humans, I only do animals. Okay, mate, that's it.
But
Good
the
boy.
board are still chasing him. Now they're suing Doc for using the word chiropractor to describe what he does.
In the horse industry, it's a common term for somebody who works with their musculature and stuff. They just say, I'm getting the chiro out. We don't assume that they've got chiropractic qualifications.
People have just called him chiropractor, I think, just out of use because he works on muscle manipulation, and that's it. He's a muscle manipulator.
I do muscle work and realign the animal, which is releasing nerves. This is why people call me a canine chiropractor.
But you've never studied as a chiropractor?
No.
And you don't hold a medical degree?
No.
And have you ever said that you do?
No, never. Never, ever.
Doc's tried to do everything right, changing the name of his business entirely to include no mention of any form of mainstream medicine. Now it's Doc Jamieson's Heaven on Earth Animal Healing. And because of the legal costs and loss of business from people unable to find their healer when he changed his business name, he's already had to close many clinics.
And I had to shut them down, and I just didn't want to do the wrong thing.
The only thing he has left now is the support of those loyal patients.
I don't understand why a chiropractic board for humans is dealing with someone who heals animals. I mean, why would you stick your nose in?
We're not going for the paper, we're going for someone who will actually treat our horses and get the results that we want.
I'll fight to the end. I'm an animal lover.
Magella Weemers there, and the Chiropractors Board of Queensland declined to comment on the case as it's due before the...
Media pressure had begun to mount, and so the board began drafting a media release statement in anticipation of winning the case. As April rolled around, a copy of the original warning letter to Doc from back in 2003 had come to light internally within the OHPRB, and they began to pressure the board for a completed version of the draft media release statement. This is very important to note because it wasn't until after the final hearing that this completely false statement was published on the internet and remained there for 18 months afterwards, continuing to prevent Doc's business from returning. This was the basis for Doc's subsequent defamation lawsuit against the Chiropractors Board of Queensland, which we will cover in upcoming videos. And although it wasn't properly realised yet, the publishing of this false statement was a monumental mistake, because with Doc's earlier affidavit establishing a penalty of $500,000 per unauthorised use of his name, it made the board liable to be sued for millions of dollars after the false statement was viewed online hundreds of times. In the minutes preceding the final hearing, in anticipation of a guilty verdict, the OHPRB sent word to Greg Stolz of the Courier Mail to notify them that the final showdown was commencing. During proceedings on the 17th of April, it was ultimately the original warning letter that the board had sent to Doc in 2003 that was the nail in their own coffin. The underlying fact was that the board had already fully acknowledged in 2003 that he was practicing chiropractic on animals and not humans, as well as basically giving him the okay to do so by stipulating that the term chiropractor must be in clear reference to animals, which it always was. When they sent Doc the complaint letter 2 years later in 2005 with regard to the supposed breaches that Doc was being accused of, nothing in the act had fundamentally changed that would warrant the complaint. The main evidence brought forward by the board was the photos of Doc's van, which was unregistered and off the road, well out of view of the public, photos which were taken illegally during a trespass. But this evidence was weightless anyway, because any common sense interpretation of the act would show that Doc wasn't in breach. To quote Section 121 of the Act, restricted titles and holding out, a person who is not a registrant must not take or use a title that, having regard to the circumstances in which it is taken or used, indicates or could be reasonably understood to indicate the person is a chiropractor or the person is authorised or qualified to practice the profession, which doesn't qualify any breach because Doc's use of the word chiropractor has always been in reference to animals, over which the Act has no jurisdiction, humans only. For the most part, proceedings during the final hearing consisted of the board's barrister attempting to make the charges and the supporting evidence appear solid and legitimate, even going so far as to accuse Doc of using the media coverage of the case to promote his business, as if that's what negative publicity does. But much like the GRA false inquiry that took place 2 months later, the board were grasping at straws to find something they could use to push through a guilty verdict. One such piece of evidence, if you can even call it that, was a letter written by a Leslie Ann Hawson, secretary for a little-known organisation called the Australian Veterinary Chiropractic Association, now known as Animal Biomedical Professionals Australia. The letter conveniently appeared during the final hearing and was addressed to the Courier Mail, apparently in response to an article covering the case, and in full support of the Chiropractors Board. But again, the contents of the letter weren't given any weight during proceedings. Interestingly, Leslie Ann Horson's career history on LinkedIn makes no mention of her role as AVCA secretary. So the hearing ended with the handing down of the decision reserved and scheduled for the 4th of May, and in the meantime the OHPRB and the board scrambled to finalise the draft of their media release statement. Then came decision day, with a verdict of not guilty being declared, and Doc walked out of court ready to start rebuilding his thoroughly decimated business with every right to advertise himself as an animal chiropractor. But the attack on Doc's name hadn't stopped yet, and before Doc had even left the court grounds, he was witness to a woman brandishing photos of a bruised and battered Rachel Thompson, Doc's ex-partner, whom we went into detail about in the false inquiry breakdown videos, explaining how she was planted into Doc's life as a saboteur. The woman showing around the photos of Rachel was purporting that Doc was a woman basher and had caused the injuries shown in the photos of Rachel. But as we already showed in previous videos, the injuries were caused by Rachel's abusive father. And who was it that was brandishing the photos that day? None other than Kerry Watson of the board of the Greyhound Racing Authority, the instigator of the entire fiasco and the perpetrator behind the orchestration of both the GRA false inquiries and the Chiropractors Board lawsuit. After winning the case in the following month, Doc prepared a grand reopening for his business, while the Chiropractors Board of Queensland licked their wounds, whined and complained a little, and set about reinforcing their Chiropractors Registration Act to ensure regulation of restricted titles was even more stringent.
An animal chiropractor taken to court for using the title is now healing more animals. He's volunteered to help the RSPCA to prove he's no quack, and plenty of clients back him.
The flame flickered for a while, but animal chiropractor Doc Jamieson is back in business after defending himself against the Chiropractors Board.
It was all over a word. Chiropractor, they said that they own the word.
Now Doc has re-registered the title and loyal clients are knocking on the door. They swear his muscle manipulation of animals is a lifesaver where pets have gone lame and veterinary surgery has failed them.
They wanted roughly $5,500 to have them fixed.
Peter Wilmot's 13-and-a-half-year-old boxer limped into Doc's crystal and candle-adorned office.
Yeah, he's pinched the base of the skull too.
And hurt the knee joint. 10 minutes of massage and acupuncture later, Peter was pleased.
Just fantastic. Just unbelievable.
And owners can't believe the fuss over the use of the title animal chiropractor.
That's what it is, muscle manipulating. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Doc fought it because he says animals are his life.
It's pretty hard to even put words to it. That's what keeps me going. You know, it's just comes from the heart and the soul.
Doc Jamieson says he'll treat just about anything. Mind you, no fish, birds or snakes. And for the disbelievers, well...
Bring your dog in and I'll show you.
Mark Sulo, 10 News.
The board was ordered to pay for Doc's court costs, but even into February of the following year they hadn't yet settled the debt, and Doc enlisted Odin's Legal to chase it down. Barely 2 months had passed after the handing down of the decision before Doc found himself caught up in the next attack, which was the frame job of the GRA false inquiries, which we know was a complete setup, not only because of the abundance of supporting evidence, but also because, as we mentioned earlier in this video, Doc was tipped off by Danny Ryan in 2006 about both the GRA false inquiries and the Chiropractors Board lawsuit. Once again, detailed video breakdowns of the false inquiries can be viewed from our website, phoenixtaskforce.org. Even after winning the case against the Chiropractors Board of Queensland, Doc's business still wasn't returning, because for the next 18 months, the Chiropractors Board's false statements saying that Doc had been found guilty remained published online, continuing to ruin Doc's name and business, with Doc none the wiser until a client brought the website to his attention sometime later.
For 26 years, Doc Jamieson has been healing animals.
Acupuncture, laser, yeah, there's nothing I can't do.
But that was put on hold when a legal battle broke out over his title as an animal chiropractor. The Chiropractor Board of Queensland took him to court, claiming he wasn't a registrant under the Act. A judge found him not guilty, but that didn't stop the board posting a statement on its website claiming the opposite.
The Chiropractor Board put up there that I was found guilty and charged, which was absolutely not true. The handing down was the 4th of May and I won the case. She said, well, not guilty on all charges.
It later apologised, but by that stage the damage was done.
They harassed me, they trespassed, they threatened a $100,000 fine and jail. Absolutely destroyed my business.
But in February he reopened his doors and is once again working his magic. This miniature dachshund was completely paralysed before chiropractic treatment, and his owner says without Doc, he wouldn't be here today.
I would be devastated if Doc didn't treat animals again, because we wouldn't have our precious puppy.
The Gympie vet is still working to rebuild his reputation and is planning to seek remuneration for his losses.
I'm back to stay. Yeah, got to fight back.
Amber Austin-Wright, Win News.
And thus began yet another even longer battle, with Doc taking legal action against the board to sue for defamation in pursuit of natural justice, which ever since has continued to this day to be diverted by Racing Queensland and its connections in regulatory bodies, the legal system, councils, health, government departments, and more. Videos on these stories are coming very soon. Let us know if you've been witness or victim to the same kind of harassment as Doc. Remember to sign the petition and show your support towards cleaning up the greyhound racing industry, and stay tuned for the coming videos where we expose even more industry and government cover-ups and corruption.